The Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep is an iconic symbol of the Rocky Mountains. They are sure-footed and steadfast, and renowned for their large, beautiful, curling horns and excellent ability to climb. But as impressive as bighorns are, sheep are a fragile species. Entire populations can easily be wiped out from diseases and other factors. In Montana's Tendoy Mountains, sheep once thrived here. In 1985, wild bighorns were reintroduced into the Tendoys to restore them to this historic range.
They transplanted 39 sheep to this area from Lost Creek in 85. And then in 86, they relocated an additional, I think it was 19 sheep into the area. So in 85 and 86, they brought in a total of about 53 sheep to this area to try to repopulate it again. They let that establish for a few years, and then the first hunting season occurred in 1988. They allowed 3 legal rams to take place during that season. It seemed to take place very quickly, and the sheep grabbed a hold of it really well and took off. Sheep numbers in just a matter of 4 to 5 years were up to 154 sheep at the highest peak in this hunting district.
Originally there was a lot of sheep in the state, and through a course of the years, a lot of those sheep have become isolated. Some of the populations have died off, and so what the department has done is it's try to reestablish sheep or augment some of these existing sheep populations through captures of populations that are doing quite well. A lot of the original captures came out of the Rocky Mountain front, where they were established. That's where we got the sheep to do Wild Horse Island, for example.
One of the biggest assets we have for wild bighorn restoration is an island located in Montana's Flathead Lake. Wild Horse Island is approximately 2,164 acres. The island has been a landmark since the Salish Kootenai were reported to have used the island to pasture horses to keep them from being stolen by other tribes. But horses aren't the only thing that have made the island legendary. Some of the biggest Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep in the entire world call this place home. In fact, 3 of the top 10 biggest rams ever recorded, including the current world record, came from Wild Horse Island.
Wild Horse Island, we've transplanted hundreds, 500 sheep I think have come off of Wild Horse Island that have gone to various transplants, not only within the state, but to some of the existing states around Montana.
It helps out the sheep on the island because when they become overpopulated, it's not good for the habitat on the island or the sheep population in general. But it's also great that we can use these sheep and move them to other areas that help establish or maintain populations across the state.
Having this secluded, disease-free population is important for the future of wild bighorn sheep. You see, in the Tendoys, the story hasn't always been so promising.
In 1993, they had the first all-age die-off. They referenced it to pneumonia. It basically reduced the sheep herd from, like I said, a historical high of 154, and just that 1 year count reduced them from 154 down to 28 sheep that quickly. And it prompted the department to take a serious look at what was going on here. 1994-95, they suspended the hunt because of that all-age die-off to try to reestablish, figure out what was going on here with the sheep numbers. 1997, they did another augmentation, bringing in more sheep. They brought 19 sheep in from the Rock Creek herd. 1999 was the next major die-off, all-age die-off, and they refer to that all-age die-off as it affects all the sheep. Again, it was early enough that there was just not a lot known about these different variances of the pneumonia bacteria.
Despite 3 subsequent transfers, this herd struggled for years under chronic, poor natural recruitment and heavy predation on what few sheep remained. In 2015, the Montana Wildlife Commission decided to use license hunters to remove all remaining sheep to eradicate the presence of any disease, which is easily passed from one animal to another, so that a new herd could be reestablished on a disease-free range.
There was obviously a lot of emotion with that 2015 decision, good and bad. I think it was a good decision. It was a tough decision. I think it was the best decision made for the sheep in their future.
A clean slate meant a fresh start for the Tendoys sheep, a chance for a brighter future. History has shown us that these mountains hold great sheep habitat if we can keep them healthy, and finding quality places for sheep to live isn't as easy as you might think. There's a reason we continue to look at the Tendoys. Researchers collect data from all over to determine good sheep habitat. One of the most difficult pieces to that puzzle is finding viable habitat that is removed from human populations, and more importantly, away from flocks of domestic sheep. Contact between bighorns and domestic sheep can be the demise of an entire bighorn population.
Fortunately, they did an actual example using the Tendoys of identifying good sheep habitat. So we just had their map right there to be able to look at, where the biggest hunk of high quality sheep habitat was, and that's right up behind me here. We could also see the place, well, if we put them right there, it's kind of a central location, so if they want to start utilizing that country to the north, or even maybe down to the Lima Peaks, this would be a good jumping off point for exploiting those other areas. And also we had the historic information of where sheep were in here. And so we kind of overlay all those things and think, okay, we'd like to put them up here on the muddy somewhere, and then just trying to find a place that seemed like a good place to send them out, no fences, things like that.
The big focus that we've got through the sheep management plan is trying to focus on working with landowners in the area. If we've got established domestic sheep, domestic goats, ideally, there's a 14-mile separation.
This is a very different landscape from when they introduced them in the 80s. There was multiple sheep operations going. There were a couple different allotments for sheep grazing that overlapped with these sheep, and I think there are sheep right in this valley.
We've got 3 landowners in this area that have domestic sheep, and there's some rules and regulations that apply on separation domestic wild sheep, and all the credit in the world to those landowners. They've been very supportive of this reintroduction, and not only this one, but the previous one and the one before that. These are 3rd, 4th generation, 5th generation sheep ranches, and that's how they make their living. But they've been great to work with, great to talk to, supportive, coming to the table. They're not making land anymore, so to try to maintain that 14-mile gap is tough.
So the way that we run a capture is we have a contracted capture team that actually goes out onto the island and net guns sheep from a helicopter. They'll hobble the sheep and then they put them in slings and they sling load them back to us where we process them. And the information that we're collecting on the sheep today is we're collecting genetic samples, we're collecting blood samples for various disease screening. We're collecting fecal samples for stress hormones, and then we're also putting collars on the sheep because these sheep will be released in the Tendoys, so they'll be able to track these sheep and see how they repopulate the area as well as monitor any mortalities. In preparation for this capture and translocation event, we did disease screening on these sheep a little over a year ago. And so we went in and we captured 27 sheep on wild horse and did a full panel disease screening to make sure that they were MOV free and that we could move them to a location safely without them transmitting diseases to other intact populations.
So that's what we've got our head down doing most of the time, is getting creative, figuring out ways to work with other partners, get other people excited about wild sheep and wild sheep restoration, but to actually see what those funds do on the ground, how they're paying for radio collars, how they're paying for helicopter time, how they're paying for rangeland and habitat studies and habitat improvements, how they're paying for water projects, disease surveillance, herd surveillance. So when you see sheep on the mountain or alongside the road, people put them there. We're well beyond the myth that nature takes care of itself. It takes active management to keep wildlife with us, and especially a fragile species like sheep.
On January 18th and 19th, 2021, 26 wild sheep were captured from Montana's Wild Horse Island and released into the Tendoys as the nucleus of a new herd.
This is just sheep habitat. Watching those rams run across that face, you wouldn't have guessed that, they just got here today. It's like they've been here for 1,000 years. And, you look at all that fescue and stuff up there, and, you need sheep. That was a missing part, so I'm pretty relieved about that.
Today, seeing everybody here supporting it, wanting to be involved with it, I'm glad I'm involved with it. I'm born and raised in this state, and 20th season doing this job. I've been here out of this area for 14 seasons, and I've missed them. This is where they need to be. They need to belong here, and it's cool to see them back. So I'm excited. I'm really excited for the future on it. So I think it's positive, and we're good to go.
Post-film premiere chat on the film that you just watched, Return of the Tendoys. My name's Keith Balfourd. I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications for the Wild Sheep Foundation. Do a couple quick introductions here. To my left is Mr. Kurt Alt, 32-year retired wildlife biologist with Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks before we drug him out of retirement, and now he is the conservation director and our Montana and international sheep and goat lead. And to my left to my right, star of stage, screen, and cinema, Mr. Jason Matzinger, who actually is our producer for this film tonight. And I just want to say I appreciate everybody joining us. This was a really an interesting journey for me. As you got to see, I was there for this trap and transfer. It was my first. An amazing experience. I can't say life-changing, but pretty darn close. I was amazed at every aspect of it. How it was like a concert. These sheep came in, and these biologists just flew into action, and it was just an amazing thing to watch. And we had Jason there to capture the footage and some photography for Prosperity and some of our other partners that Jason will mention in a bit. And we weren't quite sure what we were going to do, but we wanted to make sure that we did capture this for Prosperity. Later, we said, you know, this is just too good. So many people worked hard, so many people gave time and treasure to make this happen. Let's do a short film. And so I called up Jason. I said, hey man, you've got all this footage. I've got more from our friends Randy Newberg. They were there as well filming. I said, let's try and cobble something together. We had these fantastic interviews from the biologist on the scene, the biologist at the release site, the game warden for the area. And so that's how we got here. Jason, I'll kind of start with you because you were the guy behind the scenes splicing all this together. I know you do a lot. You've got a television show, Into the High Country, on the Sportsman's Channel. I've had that for 12 years. Very familiar with filming and camera and post producing. But this one had to be a labor of love, I would think.
Well, yeah, I mean, I kind of begged a little bit to get a position to be able to go, to be able.
That's right, I remember.
And then you extended the invite, which I was grateful for, to show up. I've always wanted to see how something like this works. I mean, the TV show is something I've done, like you said, for 12 years, but my real passion for doing this is seeing projects like this and trying to show the world how exactly hunting is conservation and where those dollars go and how they work. And so, yeah, I mean, from a producer's standpoint, it was like a dream, you know, because like you said, it was a concert. There's all these things going on, from the helicopter coming in to the biologist, to all the tools needed to loading into the trailer. I mean, as a producer, camera guy, with your camera there isn't a bad angle on a day like that. And fortunately, you know, we had nice weather. And yeah, but I mean, from my end, like you said, we didn't shoot it for a film. We just knew this was something that we definitely wanted to document and make the most of. And it just, from my end, to put the film together, I want to make sure to recognize, like you say, Randy's team, with Marcus Hockett and Jed Spear, and guys like Ben Potter and Ivan Carter and Can Outdoors, Tyler Jonerson. You know, I had to kind of corral a lot of different footage. You helped me gather a bunch to put this together, and I'm super proud of how it turned out. It tells the story. And, you know, as a Sheep Foundation member, as a producer, conservationist, every angle of it, it was just a real enjoyable project.
It was fun to work on with you. When Jason sent the first draft, I mean, there was very little to do. You nailed it right out of the gate. One piece of housekeeping for those joining us online: we'd love to get questions from you. There is a Q&A widget at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to fire some questions, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. Kurt, Jason was mentioning the on-call aspect. I can recall getting massive emails from you. This is on, this is off, this is on, it's a go, no, it's not a go. I mean, this thing almost didn't happen. I mean, there's just so many factors. We're waiting on good weather. We're waiting on the capture crew, which was, you know, flying all over Montana, doing all kinds of things. And when I went back to kind of refresh my memory, I went into my inbox, and there's just a massive amount of emails from you, because you were our coordinator, you know, helping to make sure that, you know, we got there where we needed to be and when we needed to be.
Yeah, these operations can be pretty complex, and the capture crew on something like this, you've got to have a pretty highly trained, highly experienced crew. This is dangerous work, capturing net gunning from helicopters, and so there's not many of those people. There's not many of those vendors out there, if that's the word I should use, but and so they get tied up, and a delay of a capture prior to the one you're waiting for can set it back a month. So and those delays can come from mechanical to weather to a whole variety of things like that. And so, yeah, it was an effort to keep the coordination going, and people had to be ready to go essentially with a day's notice, because that's how quickly these things evolve at times.
Yeah, that was interesting to follow, and I know that the film mentioned it, but you were involved in the very first Tendoys release back when you were with FWP.
I look at this Tendoys project, it's kind of a bit of a labor of love for me, because it represents 3 generations of wildlife biologists. Joel Peterson, who is the biologist in Dillon, who actually did the initial reintroduction. I drove the first truckload of sheep in 1985 with Joel sitting next to me, telling me not to go too fast around the corners. And then Craig Fager came in, and now Jesse Newby. And all 3 of those individuals have been in part involved with 3 different phases: the introduction, the die-off phase, the elimination phase, and now the reintroduction. And so I look at it as start a new sheep herd, but also 3 generations of efforts by 3 really, really well thought of and really experienced wildlife biologists.
It's interesting, as the film pointed out, that the Tendoys has a rocky history with these reintroductions and augmentations and die-offs and so on and so forth. And we do have a question here from the audience, which is it's a good question. After reintroduction, what is the largest obstacle the herd faces as they establish in their new range?
I think I can liken it when a person moves from one community to a community, say in some other state. These sheep have to find out where water is, where to stay cool on a hot day, where to stay warm on a cold day, where the best forage base is, and they have to contend in this day and age with a lot of canines on the landscape, as in wolves, bears, particularly with sheep, mountain lions. And so they have to adjust to a whole new environment of people that want things that want to eat them, and just to survive and learn the landscape.
That's no different when we just moved. We had to figure out where the grocery store was, the restaurant,
Yeah,
and the bar.
Exactly, and the bar. Yes. Yeah.
So very cool. I guess we'll grab into another question here. They've got some good questions. How much time is required for a herd to establish and grow large enough for hunting tags to be issued?
That's really variable. Variable on how quickly that herd adjusts to a new habitat, and also where you get the source herd, if they're going into something that's an entirely different kind of habitat, which we've learned we try not to do. We try to match habitat to habitat. It depends on how quickly recruitment occurs, how many young they have each year, what the lambing rates are, and of course predation rates as well. But also so I would say anywhere from, I think the quickest maybe hunting season that opened after reintroduction was probably about 5 years. Tendoys might be in that ball game. I think it was in the early 90s when they were introduced in 85 and 86. And so probably early 90s. So the Tendoys was about 5 years or 6 years. Don't hold me to that number, but right around that number.
I would assume they eased into it,
Yeah.
one tag, one ram tag, that sort of thing.
And it also depends on how many you start with. I mean, starting with a reintroduction of 50 versus 25 can get you there quicker. So the beginning point is important as well with numbers.
I know one thing I learned through the process of it was you guys had determined the number to be 140 sheep, right?
That's what the minimum. They'd like to see a management goal of, I think, a minimum of 140, 150 sheep. That doesn't mean it couldn't grow bigger as sheep figure out the habitat, and maybe they move to a few places that nobody ever thought they would.
But that's kind of like the starting point before you'll even look at
probably
tag allocations.
No, it's probably more like 100.
Okay.
Yeah. And we do hunt sheep at smaller population levels than that, but with a reintroduction, it's usually around 100 sheep. When it's starting to kick into gear, you're getting a predictable recruitment rate on lambs becoming adults, and you're building up that mature ram base, and yeah.
Jason, you were talking about being on call I remember you brought two little critters with you for this, and boy, they were just pie-eyed the whole time. So that was kind of neat to have your boys there.
That was really special for me. A big part of beyond producing the film or anything like when I said it, Kurt's reaction was, well, that's why we do it, right? Is to see, kind of pay it forward for that next generation. And so for me, I know, they were the only two little kids there. I don't think they quite realize what they've been involved with yet. My older one maybe does. He was 12. My youngest was 6. But for me, I mean, that's where, it really hit me, was like, hopefully someday these kids will be able to draw a tag here, be able to bring their kids here, or be able to someday say, I stood here right here with my dad when those sheep were let go. And because of video and technology, we've
super cool
documented it. So that was.
I don't think they missing a day of school that day.
No, no, I think we just had to hurry back for a dentist appointment, and that was about it. But it was worth it. I mean, they haven't stopped talking about it since. I don't think they realized the magnitude of the work being done, but that moment to them, they've told everybody they know about seeing those sheep go. So
sure,
that's pretty special. And
well, somebody's thrown in another question here, which is a good one, talking about just how, what does this operation cost? This has got to be expensive with collars, helicopter time, fuel, all the testing kits, staffing, personnel, trucks, trailers.
Well,
this racks up
I mean, just the initial layout for a collar, and we're talking not the collars we used to put out 20 years ago. We're talking about satellite collars that information can be remotely downloaded as the animal's moving across the landscape, as long as that collar is functional. That also have blow off mechanisms, so it'll automatically blow off after a number of months or years, so they can be retrieved as well, rebatteried and repurposed. But also helicopter time. Again, you got to get some really experienced people, and that's not cheap when we're talking $1,500 an hour. It's not cheap. And then you throw in, Keith, as you just said, the vehicle time, the human capital, all the other things that go into it. It's not a cheap operation.
No, I know. I put close to 1,000 miles on my truck, blasting up to Flathead and then all the way down to Dillon. But I think I mentioned it in my little blurt in there that, Wild Sheep Foundation is we raise the funds and pass these things along so these things can happen, but actually being able to see that action and work. We're here for Sheep Week this week in Reno. It's as we affectionately say, it's our annual bake sale. This is where we raise the funds to do these sorts of things, and we've had some really good funding partners on this particular project with us. Bass Pro Shops and Cabela's Outdoor Fund, Montana Wild Sheep Foundation, Midwest chapter, I believe, was also involved, and so putting and keeping sheep on the mountain's a nice purpose, but underneath that is funding. So that was neat for me to see as well, is that, this money is going on the ground for sheep.
I think the Wild Sheep Foundation, one of their big feathers in their cap is they have been able to provide a sustainable and a reliable source of funding for a long time now to the state and our state and provincial partners. And it's not just funding, it's support in many other ways. But I think that's a real important aspect of conservation is having a reliable, sustainable funding source. And of course, that's coming primarily from hunting license revenue, PR dollars, and the funds that we generate for states and provinces in our auction tags and the raffle tag process that occurs.
They're huge. That's certainly one way to do it. Jason, you've been fortunate enough to do it the other way, which is draw a resident tag twice now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So what does that feel like to go, I got a sheep tag?
It's an undescribable feeling. It really is, especially when my dad's applied for, he's been a Montana resident his whole life. He's now 73 years old. He's never had that opportunity. So it's a overwhelming feeling. It's a great feeling. It's you don't know whether to be excited or feel guilty because you were the one that got it when all these other people have been waiting. Yeah, I got to experience it, kind of the full circle of everything. And that's when we did the film Circle of Life with you guys to try to show how that funding, results to putting more sheep out there, creating more tag opportunities, creating more opportunity for people to get the chance to hunt sheep. But yeah, I mean, what an incredible thing. And the sheep bug is a real thing. I mean, you get the chance to hunt them. It's such a different, the terrain for one, the animal behavior. It's very addicting. And so once you get the opportunity to do it, you want to help out. You want to make sure that more people have the opportunity that we've had to experience it, because that's what helps, a person really fall in love with something and want to help it, is being close to it.
Yeah, certainly. Well, more sheep, more opportunity, more funding. It's a, it's not self-sustaining, but a pretty close model. We call it the wild sheep economy. And that's, every time I heard somebody draw on a tag, we'll have Jana Walla up here tomorrow talking about her Montana tag. And that's why we do it. That's why we do it.
I think that, you think about conservation in general, and I tend to be fairly practical in my thinking. We talked about funding. What you just talked about is having meaningful access to that resource. And that generates a political will to create laws and statutes that allow us to restore sheep through the combination of those three things.
Well, and to your point, you made a comment in the interviews that when you see a sheep standing on the side of the mountain, or you see one on the side of the road, being involved with a project like this or being involved with the Wild Sheep Foundation makes you realize how much work is involved to make sure those animals are there and taken care of. It's the more you dip your toes into this, the more you learn that those animals really do need our help. I know with the Circle of Life film and an interview I did with Gray, he had mentioned that 74% roughly of the funding for North American wild sheep comes through the Wild Sheep Foundation. About a little more than 25% of that comes from state or provincial agencies, things like that, and the rest is raised through these.
Yeah, we're very fortunate, with our partners and our members. The generosity and the giving is unreal. Every time we put something out there, and we put a lot out there, people step up, donate, buy raffle tickets, buy merchandise. So we've been extremely fortunate. One thing I did want to mention is, we're talking about a trap and transfer here, but there are so many other things that go into wild sheep management. Obviously, the creation of a new herd and trap and translocation is kind of the sexy thing, but there's so much more habitat and surveillance
And in today's time, it's a more complex landscape than it ever was. So you're trying to fit sheep into some great habitat, but it's not just sheep anymore. It's a lot of deer, a lot of elk. There's a lot of human activity, from development to agriculture, and so you're trying to fit sheep into a pretty complex landscape.
That's true. That's a good point. I know I see where some of our conservation grant and aid program monies go. Obviously trap and transfers, but I'm seeing, prescribed burns. I'm seeing water projects. I'm seeing, test and remove, which is kind of a new thing.
Yeah. Well, and then the cheatgrass project, that is a Montana-made program out of Bozeman, Stuart Jennings, who's developed an approach to treat cheatgrass, and it's not a herbicide, that actually stimulates production of the kind of forage that sheep that are nutritionally superior to any of the invasive species like cheatgrass. That's another part of it.
Let's dip into another question here. What proportion of rams, ewes, and lambs make the ideal transplant? That's a great question.
I think a very small number of rams are needed. Really, you want the highest proportion being actually ewes. You don't want to, in my view, I don't think you really want to take ewes and lambs if you can take it. I think pregnant ewes are going to be pregnant in the wintertime. Adult ewes that should be making up the highest proportion. Inevitably, you might get a lamb or two. The reason lambs are concerning because they can be hurt in transport, but invariably you might get a lamb or two, and then a few rams. I say it like that. Majority adult ewes.
That reminds me, we do these in the winter because of the cooler temperatures, less stress, and you've got a great chance of moving a ewe, and it's a pregnant ewe.
Right. And it's availability of capture in some of the environments, at least in Montana. But if you go to the Southwest, they're starting to move to summertime captures where their coats are less dense. And so when they're on the ground, they don't overheat as much as in the Southwest as they do in winter captures because they have the full coat. So it depends on what part of the country you're in. So in the Southwest, they're leaning more and more towards summer captures.
We've got another question here from the audience. How can a person volunteer to assist in a sheep reintroduction effort or with wild sheep conservation in general? That is a good question. We did have a handful of volunteers on this particular one, and like we've already discussed, you got to be on call, 24-hour notice or less. But we are, and the biologists rightfully so, are most concerned with the health and safety of the sheep. So, too many people, too many distractions, too many shiny objects moving around. So they try and keep the crew to a bare minimum. But getting involved in wild sheep conservation in general, some of these other things that we talked about, habitat burns, habitat work, guzzler projects, that's a lot of, hands in the dirt. We need bodies for those, and that's a great feeling to build something knowing that you're producing water in an area that there isn't any, and that benefits not only sheep but all wildlife. I've never been on a guzzler project, but I've looked at the pictures and it seems like that's another cog in the wheel.
I think the best way is if you think of our organization, being a member of Wild Sheep Foundation, but then no matter what state or province you come from, or even if you're not in a state or province that has a state chapter or provincial chapter or territorial chapter, you can join any of these other chapters. I think being engaged with Wild Sheep Foundation and their chapters allows you to have access to projects that are coming up, and between us and our chapters, we try to arrange volunteer opportunities when they're available.
Yeah, and like you said, just being a member, you have access to all the information, our newsletters, our emails, our magazines. So there's a lot of stuff pouring out with what we're doing, why, where, what's coming up, which is another a good question. The Tendoys was a successful trap and transfer. Those sheep are doing really well. I think there's an augmentation planned.
Oh yeah, we were this year was supposed to be a second wad of sheep, similar size, 25 or so sheep from Wild Horse Island. That's been postponed because Wild Horse Island is not doing as well as we'd like. The population is lower than they thought it was.
Let that build back up.
Yeah, they want to see that build back up. And part of that reduction, they've discovered there are 3 lions living on Wild Horse Island eating sheep. And so it's not a disease issue there. It's actually a predation issue. And it's a closed, semi-closed system, not entirely closed. And so the department's trying to focus on how to remove some the lions that are the primary predator of bighorn sheep.
Come across on the ice, probably.
Yeah, probably.
Speaking of wild horse, there's unbelievable footage in this, Jason, and I know that you spent some time on wild horse capturing this footage and seeing these, you know, the immense rams and up close and personal. How many times have you been up there, and how much footage have you spooled over the years?
I don't have a number on the amount of trips I've made out there, whether I was filming or photographing or just circling the island with a pair of binoculars or whatever. Fortunate to have some friends with boats. My buddy Dane has taken me out there a bunch, and the amount of footage we've shot. I mean, once you get out on, wild horse as a guy who loves sheep, but also loves to capture beautiful imagery. I mean, it's a paradise out there, and yeah, it's a big part of why I think we were able to pull this together, was just having all that stockpiled footage.
That helped a ton, because we couldn't, from a safety standpoint, be with the helicopter, be on the helicopter, capture any of that capture footage.
Right.
Certainly we saw the choppers coming in, and that was a missing piece, but you're having all of that footage in the can certainly helped.
Yeah, and to your
make
point,
this whole story come together.
Last trip I was out there was a little bit of snow, and yeah, you could definitely tell the signs of the lions were there, and so it only takes one walk across there to kind of figure out, what maybe needs to happen to get that herd back to where we need it.
Well, and that's not a simple thing on Wild Horse Island either. I mean, that's what makes this event more interesting, but also a little more complex is its jurisdictional issues, because the Confederated Salish Kootenai tribe, that's on their reservation, their tribal lands, and that's a nation unto themselves. And and I know that part of what makes Wild Horse Island works is this great collaboration that goes on between the state of Montana and the leadership and the biologists on the Confederated Salish Kootenai.
But you also have the state parks involved too.
And state parks. Yes. Yeah.
Well, and as people would have noticed in the credits, there is a long list of the Forest Service, state parks, the tribe, obviously. There's a lot of talk about the wool growers, having input to this, and so I was going to kind of jump into a little bit of a futuristic thing here. We're certainly not done. There's other suitable habitats that we're trying to focus on to reestablish populations. What can you tell us about maybe what next in the trap and transfer world?
Well, what was next, one already happened. An additional group of about 30 or so sheep were moved into the Little Belts, which was last year was the first reintroduction in the Little Belts in a long time.
Again in Montana.
In Montana, new herd, and this year they augmented it again with, I think it was 50 sheep last year and another 30 or so this year. And then the Highlands sheep herd used to be one of Montana's premier, sheep herds, and they've struggled. They've struggled with the disease die-offs that occurred in the 90s, maybe even in the late 80s, but they've never fully recovered. And there's about 5 subpopulations. The biologist imbued Vanna Bacadori is well documented how one subpopulation is doing well, but some others aren't. And so they're going to be moving into a test and remove phase. It'll be a 5-year project, and with the hopes of fully restoring that sheep herd to its preeminence.
That's a relatively new term, this test and remove. What is that?
Well, that came out of work done by Francis Casera in Idaho, the Idaho group, the tri-state area of Idaho, Washington, and Oregon, in the Hells Canyon area. It's a way to, what we found is when MOV, Mycoplasma ovi pneumonia, respiratory pathogen, is in sheep, and they can cause significant population declines. The problem is some of these populations don't recover from that decline. So this disease, this pathogen keeps recirculating. So the population, and when it recirculates, lambs that are born don't make it to winter. They die from lamb pneumonia or pneumonia from this recirculated pathogen. And so Francis Casero, Tom Besser, and some others have developed an approach to identify these, what we think are chronic carriers. And it's not
that's an adult in the herd that's hasn't succumbed, but it just keeps passing it on.
Exactly. Doesn't die from it, but is able to recirculate it. And so they've had some success in Hell's Canyon. They've had some success in Canada applying it there. And so we're moving into that phase where Montana is for the first time in the Highlands. And they've been doing it in some other places, South Dakota. I think Nebraska's tried it and with more favorable than not favorable results. So that's one of the next ones. The other thing we're doing is another phase of the project, and part of it is, and I need to say this, is the Montana Wool Growers and the Montana Wild Sheep Foundation are working together. Doesn't mean everything is rosy, but actually they've decided they want to work together and move things forward for both interests instead of fighting. And so with that, that's why part of the reasons why the Little Belts happen and why the Tendoys are happening, and also some of the thoughts on what's going on in the Highlands. We're looking at developing a better knowledge of what commingling looks like between domestic and wild sheep, and that's a collaborative effort between MSU College of Ag, Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, us, National, and Montana Wild Sheep, and Montana Wool Growers, and the Extension. And so it's a process where they're developing a proposal that will help us understand that better, so we can develop more management effectiveness on the ground. And so so the next one this winter will be a Highlands test, the beginning of a 5-year project to identify the chronic shedders in the Highland population for the first couple of years, then remove them, and then follow through to make sure they got them all. And we expect to see recruitment go up, again, following this approach. But it's going to be none of this stuff happens real quick. But we're really excited about that. And then the follow-up project that we're all working on, we think could open up opportunities for sheep reintroductions in places that have been dismissed or not seriously thought of because of concerns over risk of commingling, both between wool growers and wild sheep interests. So we think it could be a help to create new opportunities.
Awesome. Kurt, you mentioned Canada, and Jason, I know you've got a hunt up in Canada that keeps getting rolled back, and you're getting antsy to get up there. You've got a sheep hunt that you're going to do.
Yeah.
We've got another question here. I think it's another good one. Are trap and transfer programs used to manage populations up north, such as Dall sheep, stone sheep? I have no idea.
I'm going to speak just a little out of line.
Not you, Kurt.
Yeah, probably not there. We haven't seen the population declines due to respiratory pathogens. At least it hasn't been as obvious in Dall and stone sheep habitat as it has been in bighorn sheep habitat. So those are thin horn sheep species. But there's other things that are happening right now up there. I mean, they've had some really severe winter conditions this last year that's led to population declines. There's a need for broad burns to open up habitat again. It's more conducive for sheep than a closed conifer type. So they have other concerns, but as far as I know, they haven't had the need to do that in thin horn range, which are the Dall and stone sheep.
That's good. I mean, if you pull back and look big picture, what we're doing here with bighorns is, their populations were extirpated from most of their historic range.
Yeah.
And so we're going back into, there used to be sheep here, there used to be sheep here. Fortunately, up north, where there was historic ranges of sheep, those sheep are still there.
Right.
Okay.
Are they growing? Are those herds up north growing, or are they just kind of maintaining?
I think there's concern for both Dall and certainly stone sheep. I would say stone sheep is one of a high concern. Doll sheep, with what's occurring up north with really hard winter and potential population declines, I think there's real concern over doll sheep in the coming year or two.
And that's you're hunting dolls.
Doll, yeah, Northwest
With your bow?
Territories. That's the plan.
Man,
Lucky
good
man.
Lucky man.
If all goes well, we'll be watching another film here.
Yeah, there you go.
Another
There we go.
Another Jason movie. Let's do one more question. How about that? And then I'll let you guys just kind of wrap up with any final thoughts. What challenges did you face capturing a trap and transfer program during the creation of this film? That's kind of an interesting one.
Well, I've got a couple things that I could answer from my
Yeah, I've got one. Go ahead.
Well, a couple things that come to mind was just how careful everybody is about the system. You know, from the sheep landing to everybody being back to then going to get the sheep to moving them. There's a specific order that has to happen. And even if one camera guy gets in the way, which I did a couple times, I got hollered at. I mean, you gotta, so from a producer standpoint, you gotta know where you gotta be to capture what you can, but also be out of the way of what's really important right there. And, you know, actually I put a drone in the air right after we released the sheep, and I had no sooner got it in the air and I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be great. And Jesse came and said, who's flying the drone? Put that thing down. We can't have any stress on these animals. So there's things as a producer I would have loved to have done to, you know, you have these visions of shots and things that we're limiting because the number one focus is making sure those sheep are taken care of.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go. I wasn't doing any filming. I was just a fifth wheel there, opening a door and closing a door. But I was really keenly interested. So as soon as they brought the sheep in, they took their temperature.
Yep.
And monitored it. And we had a few sheep toward the end where the temperature was a little higher than they liked, and we were packing them with some snow in the trailer. And I asked one of the biologists, and they said, yeah, after you've made a couple of trips with a helicopter and the sheep get run around a little bit, those latter sheep come in heated up, hotter. And it was just these biologists with FWP, boy, they were right on it.
Well, and you know, and so you have a whole cadre. You have the wildlife biologist, but then you have the state wildlife vet. You have the disease ecologist. You have a whole cadre of people monitoring these sheep continuously once they're captured and released. And I think, you know, Jason, and you know, I know you know this is, you know, when those sheep, you think about what that sheep just went through, that animal, you know, some great giant bumblebee just put a net over them, slung them in the air, put them on the ground, then they got stuffed in a trailer, and then they experienced the vehicle ride for the first time in their life, and to God knows who knows where they were going. And so you think about that stress when they're leaving. You know, I know that the biologists really are keyed into trying to keep that stress as minimal as possible. So, and
I felt about this.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's,
but yeah, it makes sense. I
things,
obviously respected it. I understood, you know, so.
I'm kind of glad you brought that up, Kurt, because I'd be remiss when you're standing there and you watch, they swing those doors open and you watch these sheep looking around, boy, they see the horizon, they go, there's a high spot, and boom. And they just, to see them bailing out of this trailer and scurrying up, and they kind of did that mule deer pose. They got up to where they felt good, and then they turned around and they looked back and went, what the hell was that?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
But they took right to it. You know, and that was the part I mentioned that was emotional. It was for me, and I think for everybody there, just to see that go. It's hard to describe. It's just one of the coolest things I've ever been a part of.
Yeah, it is. I mean, to be we're fortunate to have lived in this time where so many people have done work before us to where, I mean, for me personally, when I came in, wildlife populations in the state of Montana were great. And so it was an opportunity to really see that it isn't always going to be that way if we don't take the time to do this work. That, the reason it was so good is because, Kurt, you've been working for years and, behind the scenes to make sure this stuff happens. And one question on there that I think was a good question that we never got to was, do other wildlife species benefit from projects such as trap and transfer? And I remember, Kurt, to go back to where we started, when you were saying you got to coordinate that helicopter team and this email string is going back and forth. I mean, obviously you can answer this better than I can, but the amount of trap and transplants for other wildlife species around our state, it went on. And it wasn't just sheep, it was elk, it was antelope, it was
mule deer,
all these things.
moose.
So I think obviously other animal species do benefit from trap and transplant.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, Jason. And, and I think I would be remiss if I didn't say this is, I would give my teeth to go on these operations, but I've gone on so many of them. I truly been blessed to be able to do all these things in my career. And when I think about you and Keith never having gone on one, I would have no hesitation of giving up a spot and not going so others that have never gone get to go. And I think that's how all of us in the conservation staff feel. We've all done these things and we know, and to sit here and look at and listen to you two talk about your experiences makes me smile. That's how it should be. It's to get more people involved and give them an opportunity to do things that you've done. And if it means you can't go and do it, so be it. I'd rather be out than in and let somebody else in.
Awesome. Well put. Kurt, thank you very much.
You,
I appreciate it. Appreciate all the insights, Jason. Well done. It was a pleasure working with you on that. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you for those excellent questions. I hope you enjoyed the film. I hope you learned some additional information from this chat. And as always, we appreciate your support at the Wild Sheep Foundation. If you're not a member, we'd love to have you. It's easy, wildsheepfoundation.org. And we're looking forward to the show kicking off here. Our banquet is tomorrow night. That's our welcoming banquet, Wednesday. And then the exhibit hall here opens on Thursday. And Thursday, Friday, Saturday, it's rock on. So thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Keith, and thank you, Jason. Great film.
Well, I appreciate it. Couldn't have done it without either of you guys and all your hard work as well, and everybody else we listed. It's a huge effort of a ton of people. So proud to just be a small part of it.